This is Minding the Forest, a podcast of the Louisiana Forestry Association. Hello, I'm your host, Jeff Zeringue. Welcome to a new year of Minding the Forest, where we talk about forestry and the importance of managed forests. The forest products industry is important to managed forests, and that industry includes landowners, loggers, and the mills that make the products. They all play important roles in the conservation efforts that keep our forests healthy to provide us with clean air, clean water, and great habitat for Louisiana's wildlife. That's why the LFA supports keeping almost 15 million acres of forest land in Louisiana as forests. This is episode 49. We talked to Louisiana Insurance Commissioner Tim Temple. It's an important conversation because insurance affects everyone, especially the businesses like loggers who have seen premiums for trucks and other equipment rise at an even faster rate than most other drivers in the state. We also include some contact information for the Louisiana Department of Insurance and some past news items as it pertains to some of the topics that we'll talk about. Here's Tim Temple. We have with us Commissioner Tim Temple. He is the Commissioner of Insurance for the state of Louisiana. Commissioner Temple, thanks so much for taking time for us.
Hey, glad to do this today.
And Happy New Year to you.
Well, Happy New Year's to you.
Okay, first of all, I'd like to just talk a little bit about yourself. You're a DeRidder native, I think it is.
That's right, yeah.
And tell us about, you came up, how'd you get in insurance?
Sure, yeah. So grew up in DeRidder, class of 1988, DeRidder High School graduate, go Dragons. But, I started in the industry. I followed my father into this business. And I started off in the 90s as an insurance agent working out of an office in Shreveport. A couple of years later, transitioned to Dallas. And during that stage, I was an insurance agent. I was selling insurance, right? Did that for several years, got involved, just kind of grew my interest beyond just selling insurance. And so over the next 20 plus years, I was an insurance agent. I was a reinsurance broker, managed a Bermuda captive into runoff, have gotten involved in the claim side of the industry, never adjusting claims. I don't ever want to represent that I went out and actually physically adjusted claims, but managed adjusters. Mm-hmm. I was part of a TPA, third-party administrator for a while, did some disaster recovery claims management, so large, catastrophic, when you surge hundreds of adjusters into an area after like a hurricane. So I was involved with that. And during all of this time, too, my family, like I said, I followed my father's footsteps into it. He started off as an agent, but he and his business partner started AmeriSafe, what is now today AmeriSafe, which is a publicly traded company, but writes workers' compensation. Started off in DeRidder in the logging industry, and they now write workers' comp all over the country. So grew up in this business. And, I like to say insurance is good when it works. It's a good business, but it's also, it's a product that you buy that you hope you never have to use.
Yeah.
Right. And I think we need to start having conversations about that again and bringing people back to that. Because I think a lot of people now think that insurance is an investment. They pay a premium and they expect a return on it. But it's really something you hope you never are in a position to have to use.
We have talked a couple of years ago when you first came into office. You were actually, I think, preparing to take office.
When we last sat down, yeah.
And a lot has happened. We've had a general session where some bills have passed. And let's talk a little bit about what passed in the 2024 session that was good for insurers or for those who are insured too.
Yeah. And it was a busy year for sure. We've had a very successful regular session that started back in, I believe it was March or April. I can't remember back then. But we went to it, and I, as the Commissioner of Insurance, and if I could take a step back, when I became Commissioner-elect in August of 2023, I started meeting and engaging with stakeholders as the incoming commissioner, and once you're the incoming, people are more likely to return your phone call, right? But no, right. So I started engaging with all the parties, all the interested parties, insurance companies, reinsurance companies, insurance agents, brokers, claims adjusters, attorneys that have represented clients that didn't have a good claims experience, consumer advocacy groups, everybody, just individuals and business owners, and everybody telling about how insurance, their version of why it wasn't working. And we collectively agreed that these are some of the problems, and let's come up with some of the solutions. So that's what we did. And when I took office on January 8th, working in concert with the governor and the legislative leadership, we were able to introduce a package of bills designed to address the property issues that we were having in our state. Okay. And I think that it's important to also acknowledge that, insurance, like any other business, doesn't have to do business in our state. They don't have to come here. They don't have to put their capital at risk. And so just like if you're evaluating where you want to go do business, insurance companies do the same thing. And again, we're focused on property right now, and we'll expand beyond that. But with regards to the property market, if you're a company and you want to write property business that's going to be hurricane exposed, and you want to do it in the Gulf Coast, you only have 5 states that you get to pick from: Texas, Louisiana, Mississippi, Alabama, and Florida. And so those insurance companies are going to look at the regulatory environment. They're going to look at the legal environment, and then they're going to look at the actual, the physical risks themselves. And that's when I came into office with that knowledge, that mindset that we need to make sure that we are paying attention to our regulatory, our legal, and then the physical structures themselves, that perspective. And so this package of bills was designed to address some of the regulatory inadequacies that Louisiana had, some of the legal inadequacies that made us more difficult to do business, and again, also the physical risk, and that's talking about like fortified roofs and building codes and that kind of stuff. Right. So we came with this package of bills to address that, and we passed every property reform bill that was introduced. Okay. And that doesn't mean we're done, though, too. I don't want your listeners, to think that, okay, we passed this and we're done. We're not going to come back to that. Because I also believe that you must constantly, it's like going to the gym. You want to go get in shape, you eat healthy, and you go to the gym. But you don't go to the gym once a week, right? You don't eat healthy
once a month.
Yeah. You got to do it. You got to have a program, and you got to constantly work at it. Well, we have to constantly work and tweak our regulatory and legal environment because all the other states I mentioned, they're constantly doing that. But we came to, we passed these bills, and it was designed to make Louisiana a more attractive place for companies to want to come and do business. And we're doing that. We're on that path. The indications, I've got companies that I'm in conversations with, they're saying, we're looking at your state to do property business. I've got companies that are actually going through the regulatory application process to come and write policies, homeowners policies in Louisiana. So, don't ask me when, because I know that's going to be the question. Oh, well, when's this going to take? When are we going to see lower rates? Because everybody wants that. I want that.
And everybody wants it right now.
And they want it right now.
But that's not realistic.
But we got to remember, we didn't get here overnight. We're not going to get out of this overnight, but we are going to get out of this crisis. So we're on the right path with regards to the property reform. I was very pleased with the package, but that doesn't mean we're not going to have other bills that we're going to bring next session and maybe even tweak some of the ones that we passed this last session.
Those bills are pretty much a moving target, aren't they? I mean, if you correct one thing and there's still a weak area there, the regulation can be changed to make it beneficial for everyone. I mean, regulation is sort of a naughty word to some people because it restricts companies that would like to do something else, but then it protects
protects the consumer.
The consumer, right?
Right. And there's balance there.
Yes, and how do you find that balance? Because insurance companies, like any other company, is designed to make a profit. I mean, there's no company out there that doesn't want to make a profit. Well, but look,
if they aren't making profit, that's not a company you want to do business with. Because look, we saw after Laura, Delta, Zeta, and Ida, 13 companies go insolvent. Wow, those were 13 companies that took your premium, and then when you called and had a claim and needed it paid, they weren't there to pay it. So that's the other charge as the regulator. Yeah. I've got to make sure that companies are coming in and charging adequate rate. Cheap insurance may sound great when you're writing that premium check. Yeah. But when you call them and say, "Hey, I've got a claim," and they say, "Sorry, we're out of business," then that cheap insurance really didn't do anyone any good. So my job is to make sure that the rate is also adequate. Okay. And again, but to the regulatory part, yeah, it is. This is about balance. It's about making sure that companies have a healthy environment to operate in, while at the same time making sure that they're doing what they're supposed to do to take care of their customers, which is you and me and your listeners.
And really the whole point of me getting to come on Minding the Forest is the insurance for loggers. As you well know, coming from DeRidder, there's a big logging community there, and pretty much half the state is forested area. So we're looking at a huge industry, a multi-billion-dollar industry, and the loggers, quite frankly, are struggling because it is very costly to get insurance. And well, from what you're saying, there's just so few who insure, especially rigs as much as loggers have to deal with, the big machinery and trucks and all that. How do you address? Where do you start with something that is just so huge right now?
Yeah, well, and look, and you're exactly right. I mean, the logging industry. I mean, timber is our largest agricultural product in our state.
The number one crop in Louisiana.
Number one crop in Louisiana. And so we've got to make sure that we're taking care of that industry. And it's not from an insurance perspective. And yes, I hear, I've sat down with, men and women that are in the logging industry that either drive the trucks, on the vehicles, on the trucks, and they're not struggling. They're being strangled. They're being forced out of business. And it's because of the excessive premiums being charged. But the premiums are being charged, from what I see, because the losses justify that premium. This isn't just companies charging you tens of thousands or thousands and thousands of dollars, and they're putting that in their profit and they're making money all the way to the bank. I mean, these insurance companies are paying out huge losses. And I think your listeners, everybody's got an example of, their truck, tapped a car. Or their truck was hit by another car and got litigated against. And in the insurance companies, sometimes they settle because they realize that if they go to trial, then then the losses are going to be much greater than if they settle. And I know people get frustrated with that process. But what we got to focus on is we have a system in Louisiana where that is allowed to happen. And that's what we're trying to change. We're trying to, like I said, rebalance. And look, if you have been involved in an accident, an auto accident, and it wasn't your fault, and you had damages, whether it was to your vehicle or to yourself, medical damages, you are entitled to fair compensation. And I'm never going to get in the way of that. You deserve. That's what insurance is for. Yeah. It wasn't your fault. Someone did damage to you, either physical or, bodily injury. You deserve to be compensated for that. But we have created, or allowed to be created, a system in our state that people are enriched through the process.
Better than the lottery.
Better than the lottery for a lot of people, and so we've got to address that. If we don't address that and change the laws to rebalance it, it's not going to get better. It's going to get worse. And so that's what we're talking about. And we'll get into some of the auto stuff that we did during the session and some of the things we didn't get done that we're going to continue to fight. But
let's talk about that now. Yeah. Let's get into from the auto perspective of insurance. What took place last year? We had a, and I'll tell you this, that process I told you about on the property side, we were able to get all those stakeholders in the room and talk about what needed to get done or needed to be done. That didn't take place with regards to auto liability or legal reform. That's what we're talking about. Couldn't get, not all of the players are willing to come to the table and have a frank conversation about how this is strangling our Louisiana economy and what needs to be done to rebalance this. Yeah. So the bills that were brought with regards to legal reform it wasn't so much a kumbaya moment, if you will. This was, different sides, different industries thinking this is what needs to be done and charge forward. So, but we were successful getting a direct action bill passed. In direct action, Louisiana was I believe we were one of 4 states at the time that allowed, if you and I were to be involved in an accident and it was my fault, and you decide to litigate against me for whatever reason, you don't litigate against Tim, you litigate and name Tim's insurance company. Okay. So if you go to a judge or a jury, more specifically a jury, all they see is the insurance company name. You've taken away that kind of human aspect of it, and it's just some big corporation that, the other side's going to paint. They've got billions of dollars, and so, you should be awarded a lot of money because it's not going to hurt that company.
But when it's a direct action, you have to litigate against it's called the tortfeasor, the person that caused the injury to you. You have to name that person. So now it's more personal. You're suing Tim. You're not suing Tim's insurance company. And if you're successful and you're awarded damages and monetary damages and whatnot, my insurance company still has to pay you. It doesn't mean that it's just whatever's in Tim's pocket. It's still, my insurance company is still contractually obligated, but you have to name the person. And like I said, Louisiana was only one of 4 states that allowed you just go straight and name the insurance company. So we're in mainstream, and that was one that needed to be done. It kind of helps shift the dynamics when juries are looking at awards. The other thing, and this was one that was promoted and pushed by a lot of people, was changing the statute of limitations in the prescription period in Louisiana.
That was kind of contentious.
It was contentious, yeah. And look, I supported it, and I went to the table and said, I'm in support of this, provided we get the other legislation that we need to have done too.
Right.
And we didn't get some of that. So, but the 2-year prescription, Louisiana was a 1 year. So if you are involved in an accident and you decide to litigate, you had 12 months to bring your action, your legal action. We moved it to 2 years. And the argument for that was that it will allow both parties to give them more time before they actually have to go to trial. That was the argument.
Is that necessarily a good thing?
Since then, it's come out that I think less than 1% or somewhere around 1% of all these lawsuits that are filed actually go to trial. So I think there's a counter argument against it now that more information has come out. But nonetheless, it's the law we live with today. We'll have to wait and see. There's some people that think that all you're going to do is you're going to have, people are going to have 2 years to run up medical expenses, lost wages, legal expenses before they notify the insurance company. So, I think that there's some validity to that argument, that position. So, but it is the law. We're going to work through it, and we'll see what happens.
Will data be collected on that to see whether that has made a difference?
It would be. I would love to get the legal industry to be more transparent. We talk about transparency, and they talk about wanting to have transparency into all these things that insurance companies do. I think transparency, sunshine's good for everybody. I think that's one that you'll hear more conversations around. But those were two, probably I'd say the 2 big bills, if you will, that with regards to legal reform. Another one that got out of both the House and the Senate, but was later vetoed, was it was called collateral source.
Okay.
And
what does that mean?
And it can be complicated, but in trying to keep it as simplistic as possible, what the intent there was that, whenever you have a medical procedure done as a result of an auto accident, you're involved in a wreck, you have a broken arm. Okay. Let's use that for an example. You go seek medical treatment. You have health insurance. And if anyone's used health insurance and, you get that statement about a month later from your health insurer, and they said that, on this date, you went and got this treatment from this doctor, and they billed you $1,000, but because of the, negotiated discounts and everything, it's only $500.
Okay.
Right. What the bill that we were bringing was to bring transparency to that. Say you have to show that you were billed $1,000, but your insurance provider only paid $500 because that's what negotiated. So the most that someone would be out is $500, not the $1,000.
Right.
When you litigate, right now, all you have to do is show that $1,000 that was billed. And so when a judge or jury awards you based on that number, it's a phantom damage. You were never out $1,000.
Right.
Your healthcare provider was never out $1,000. They were, you were the healthcare provider were out $500. Okay. That's what we were trying to show, is that that's what you should collect, not the higher amount. So we're going to bring another bill to continue to address this, because that is one of the things that is demonstrated time and time again during these legislative hearings as driving insurance costs in Louisiana.
So that would be more accurate to what's
transparency.
Exactly. So with so many lawyers in the legislature, it does pass, but it doesn't pass a veto-proof vote. So, I mean, what was it about the bill that the governor said was not good enough to sign into law, but to veto?
Well, and he provided a veto, press conference on that. But I mean, and if just trying to be is remember clearly and accurately,
certainly,
it was that I'm trying to think what the language said, but it was not in the best interest of the consumer because it limited consumers' ability to recover what they were owed, what was just. And all this would do is let the profits go to the insurance companies. And again, I'm paraphrasing very broadly there, but
we'll
if your listeners need to want to go back
for a link for that, and I can put that in the show notes.
There's a very lengthy press conference on that.
Right.
So, but again, and look, it doesn't matter why. I mean, that it was vetoed. I think the thing that I want your listeners to understand is we just need to continue.
Mm-hmm.
We find out, have a conversation with the governor, with other stakeholders, find out what can we do, what can we agree to that will protect the consumer, and we certainly want to do that. I mean, I'm elected, and part of my charge is consumer protection. So I want to protect the consumer's ability to recover damages fairly.
Right.
But at the same time, we've got to create this marketplace because the insurance companies are the ones saying we don't want to do business there. And if we do business in your state, it costs more money because of losses. And so we've got to make sure in balance. And, I hear more people telling me they can't afford the insurance than I do people saying, I don't like the settlement that I got.
Yes.
Right?
Yes. I think that's accurate.
So we've got to make sure that we're taking care of people. I mean, if people can't afford insurance, that's the first problem. We've got to address that problem, because when you drive down the road and you don't have insurance, that creates another problem. And
we still have a large population of drivers who do not carry insurance. Is that correct?
Jeff, the number I've seen, and I'm actually working to try and get more accurate because this number lags. I think it's about a 2-year lag.
Yeah.
But the number that I see is that Louisiana is slightly below the national average of uninsured drivers.
Okay.
I think we're somewhere around 11.5%, somewhere in that range. Our neighbor to the east in Mississippi, their uninsured motorist is like 25%.
Wow.
But they have much more affordable insurance rates than we do, right? On auto. So it's not an uninsured motorist driver. It's a problem. Don't get me wrong.
Right.
And I think in the urban areas, it's probably higher than that national average.
Yeah.
In the rural areas, I would think it's below. And again, I'm working to collect more accurate current data on that, so I can I'll once I have that and feel comfortable with the numbers, I'll obviously start talking about that.
Certainly.
But I think the bigger issue in our state is that we have underinsured drivers. Somewhere around 40 to 44% of the vehicles, I think it's 40% of the vehicles on the road carry minimum limits.
Okay. Are those minimum limits just too low now?
They're too low. And I mean, the minimum limits for the physical damage on a car won't repair or replace a car because of just the higher values that, the cost of the car has gone up over the years.
Right.
The minimum limits have stayed low for, and I should be able to tell you how many years it's been, but I just don't have that number off the top of my head. But I get, a lot of comments, we need to raise the minimum limits. I can't do that as commissioner. That takes the legislation, but I would caution against doing that, because right now, when you've got the highest auto rates in the country and you raise the limits, that's going to make it even more expensive. I think what happens is then the uninsured motorist rate goes up.
Oh, okay.
It's
you
almost
outprice
hydraulic.
the market,
right?
Basically.
If this goes up, then if the premium goes up, then the uninsured motorist rate goes up.
Yeah.
So we've got to be careful on that, and I certainly advocate getting Louisiana in a position where we can increase limits, but we've got to work on the premium first and drive premium down.
Okay. You have advocated for a special session covering insurance alone. And our conversation before we started talking for the show was that you still have hopes for that in the new year. So
yes,
well, I guess it's a crisis enough. It is warranted, isn't it?
Look, I was saying that we need to have a special session for insurance back in August of 2023. when I became commissioner-elect. And look, we've had a special session to address criminal justice reform. We've had just recently, at the end of 24, there was a special session for tax reform.
Yeah.
Both complex issues, and tax probably arguably more complex than criminal justice.
Certainly.
I would say that insurance is more complex than tax.
Yeah.
And that's why I think we need to have a special session. I think the citizens of Louisiana and the businesses of Louisiana deserve to have a special session. Over at the Capitol, you hear it all the time. They've been dealing with tort reform or legal reform for decades. And they're right. They have. But they haven't dealt with it in a special session. They've dealt with it in regular sessions. And those legislators, God bless the workload that they have when they're in session, because they have thousands of bills that they have to consider. Some make it through the process, some don't, but they have to consider all of them at some stage.
Right.
Committee hearings or either floor votes. That takes up a lot of bandwidth, and it's easy for things to get lost in the argument, but it's also, there's a lot of leverage that can take place. Support this bill and I'll support that one, or if you'll help kill this one, I'll kill, there's a lot of horse trading that goes on during a regular session. So I think that the citizens deserve a special session on insurance. It's complex. And to my knowledge, we've never had a special session on insurance, but it is the hot button topic of our state. There are people sitting around their kitchen tables every night. There are businesses sitting around their conference room tables or sitting across the table from their CPA or their, chief financial officer. They're talking about insurance. And I'm thankful for all of the work that the legislature, the governor has done to change some of the fundamentals of Louisiana's tax structure and some other areas, criminal justice reform, education reform, reorganizing Louisiana economic development to make it more efficient as they go out and market our state and attract new businesses. DOTD, they want to make that more efficient, and I think they are, so that more money goes towards new bridges and better roads. But we've got to add insurance to this conversation. We're changing all these other dynamics I just mentioned, which are great and will help promote Louisiana and grow our economy and hopefully bring people back, so our state actually has more people coming in than moving out. But if we stay the same with the highest auto rates and the highest homeowner rates, those are hard headwinds to overcome, despite all the other economic success we may have.
Well, doesn't insurance touch pretty much all of those issues you just mentioned?
I think it does. I think it does. And that's why, again, I'm so thankful that they have taken, and all of those things, those have been issues too that we've been dealing with for years. But that's why we've got to make sure that insurance stays part of the conversation. Like I said earlier in the program, property reform, you're going to see bills every session where we're constantly tweaking. Because again, our neighbor states, their legislators go into session every year. I think Texas is every other year, but they always go in. They're modifying and changing and competing. So we've got to continue to do the same thing here. So I'm always going to bring legislation that I think is going to help benefit the consumers by helping to promote a competitive marketplace on property. But auto, we haven't done as much as we need to.
Well, you say that Texas you think is every other year. Isn't that pretty much what you're faced with? Because the coming year, isn't it a fiscal only session?
It's fiscal. It's a fiscal session, but each legislator is allowed 5 non-fiscal bills.
Okay.
So it's maybe quasi, if you will, a little bit in Louisiana. So, but still, that's 104 legislators. If every single one of them brings 5 non-fiscal bills. See that again,
so you have 144 chances of getting at least one insurance bill.
Right.
Too.
Well, yeah.
Considering 39 in the Senate and 105.
I think a little bit better odds than that. But you got 5 bills that each legislator has that can be on anything other than fiscal. So so we can address this during the next session. But again, it's going to be during a fiscal session.
Right.
That's going to be the focus. So I don't want legal reform to get lost in the.
Which could be easy because every fiscal session, it seems like, and well, even with the tax reforms they just passed, they've already admitted that we're going to bring in a little bit less money than what was done with the former income tax rate. Right. So there's a lot of
There's gotta be
unknowns.
a lot of tweaks they're going to have to do. I mean, they may have to pass some legislation in the fiscal session that to help clean up what was passed during the during the special session.
Yeah.
So again, but I think your point is that you got to you've got to continually focus on it and modify it. So, but again, I think we need one. I would like to see one. Mm-hmm. As far as when that would happen, I don't have the crystal ball on that. Yeah. I think it makes more sense if one were to take place, and that's a big if, to have it immediately before the regular session, versus after the end of the regular session, because you've got a lot of fatigue. People have been at the Capitol for a couple of months. They're ready to go home.
Yeah. Well, we had that in 2024. We had they were in Baton Rouge for a very, very long time.
They were. I mean, and look, and that's one thing we haven't touched on is in addition to the special sessions that they had and the long regular session that they had, the legislators, the House and Senate Insurance Committees, the House Civil Law Committee, and the Senate Judiciary Aid, those four committees have been meeting almost every month. I know the insurance and the two House committees have for sure, have met July, August, September, November, and now December to continue conversations on the auto crisis. What needs to be done? Mm-hmm. What are the cost drivers? Why are claims more expensive in our state? Why is an auto claim more expensive in our state versus other states? Right. So in addition to all those sessions that I mentioned, they've been calling themselves and, spending, the first hearing we had, I think it was 8.5 hours, the very first one we had. So the last one we had, the one that was had in mid-December was 4.5 hours. So these are not short sessions, and we're talking about these cost drivers. So there's a lot of time being spent at the Capitol by legislators trying to really understand this matter. But again, I think that only highlights the fact that we need a special session for this.
State agencies, state government in general, they're always looking at other states for good ideas that they can implement in Louisiana. Is there anything out there that you're looking at that would be helpful to Louisiana?
There are, and there are a lot of ideas that have been batted about. I had mentioned, I think 7 or 8, maybe 10 during the December hearing. What at least is starting to bubble to the surface after all these conversations that are taking place, these hearings, about what needs to be done. We've thrown out I think I mentioned, transparency in medical billing. We're talking about, maybe we need to do some type of caps on award, damage award that you can receive as a result of an injury or general damages. And again, I don't want to get too legalese, but anyway, putting a cap on what you can recover. I think our friends in Mississippi, I think it's $1 million cap over there. So we're looking at other states. Look, I think, and this is one that it's controversial, but I think we need to discuss it, is a distracted driving bill. And I think anybody that spends a lot of time on the road, and I certainly spend a lot of time on the road, there's a lot of distracted drivers. There's a lot of people looking at their phones. There's a lot of people texting. Yeah. There's a lot of that going on. And so we need to have, if you're a distracted driver and because of that, you cause an accident or you get involved in an accident, you need to have some responsibility for that. There's a comparative fault. Louisiana doesn't have comparative fault, and that's basically where, your contribution to the accident occurring gets factored into the damages awarded. And then there's some where I believe it's if you are found to be more than 51% a cause, then you can't recover damages for that. Another one an idea we've talked about is, and I talked about the 2-year prescription right now where, and look, I hear it from a lot of individuals. I hear it from a lot of businesses. Was involved in a wreck, talked to the person. They said, no, I'm fine. Don't worry about it. And then 11 months and 30 days later, they get notice that they're being litigated against. One that's being talked about is and I'm going to mess up the term here, but basically a pre-litigation notice. You've hired an attorney. You need to let whoever you're going to sue know that you've hired an attorney. Yeah. I think that's, you need to be transparent about that, because a lot of times that's what happens. Like I said, somebody's out there incurring all these expenses to sue, to litigate, and they litigate, and you never even knew it. You didn't know that they had been going to the doctor for the last 8 months.
Yeah.
You didn't know they were getting surgeries or back treatments or, lost wages, all these things that add up. I think that you should know that. I think you should have the right to know that someone's hired an attorney and they're looking to try and litigate against you. That's an idea that's been brought up. There's a lot more, but those are just a few of things. But again, to your point, we're looking at other states,
right?
And we're saying, okay, how does that contribute? But I also want your listeners to know, I think it's worth stating that there is no one silver bullet,
right?
And again, because we're talking about the laws, that comes back to that point about it. These are complex. So if we pass a comparative fault, what other areas of the law do we need to also look at and tweak? So that's why I think a special session is necessary, so that we can make sure that we don't pass anything that creates some unintended consequence down the road that is bad for everybody, bad for consumers, bad for consumer protection, creates an environment where, companies say, oh, wait a second, this didn't do what we thought it was going to do. So again, I think that just highlights the fact that we need to have a special session so that we can truly work on things that are going to create this marketplace where companies come back in, they can rebalance and pay losses that are justified and not excessive, which will help bring losses down, which will help bring premiums down.
Well, about to wrap up now. If you had a message to tell, especially loggers, but everyone has insurance in the state, and so, but when they're looking at the end of the year and they're looking at their bottom line and looking at the costs of everything, what message would you send to loggers? Well,
look, I say this. I mean, I hear the conversations all the time, as you noted. I'm from DeRidder. I still get back there often. Still have a lot of friends in this business of logging and timber as well. And I understand how it's impacting individuals, how it's impacting families, how it's impacting businesses, the mills, that entire industry. And I am working to make it better. It's not going to get better overnight. And I'll tell you, on the property side, like I said, we didn't get in this crisis overnight. We're not going to get out of it overnight, but we are going to get out of it. But we've got to keep pushing. I would ask the loggers, folks listening to this program, keep letting your legislators, your elected officials know how insurance is impacting you, how it's hampering your ability to grow your business, hampering your ability to hire new personnel, hampering your ability to buy new equipment, expand your business. We need to make sure that we broaden this message beyond just how it impacts us personally at a personal level, and it does. I'm not diminishing that, but we've got to talk and introduce in the conversation how it's inhibiting our state's ability to grow its economy. And I think we will be successful if we highlight that and focus on bringing solutions, bringing real solutions to change and rebalance. I keep using the word rebalance. I want people, and people are always going to have their ability to seek legal justice when they've been wronged, whether it's by an individual or an insurance company. There's always going to be that ability. I believe in that, and that is one. It's a good consumer protection. It also is a deterrent for bad actors out there. So we need to make sure that we preserve that, but it can't be at the expense of all of us, paying and funding a system that is only benefiting a few people. So hang in there. I know it's tough, but we're working on it. I am committed to changing this marketplace so that you get to keep more of your money in your pocket and spend less on insurance.
Commissioner Tim Temple, Commissioner of Insurance for the state of Louisiana. Tim, thanks so much for joining us.
Thank you. I appreciate the opportunity and look forward to the next time.
Thank you for listening to Mind of the Forest. We have links to past news stories about the governor's veto of HB 423, a website link to the Louisiana Department of Insurance, and a link to the legislature's website where you can find your legislator's contact information if you would like to contact them whenever they are in session or out of session with your concerns. So take note of that, please. We also have the contact information for the Louisiana Forestry Association. And don't forget, you can send comments or suggestions to me by email at jzeringue@laforestry.com. That's jzeringue at laforestry.com. You can subscribe to Mind of the Forest by clicking on the subscribe button on your favorite podcast app, and be sure, tap the notification button so you'll know when we drop a new episode every month. And remember, at the Louisiana Forestry Association, we're Mind of the Forest for you.